I woke up this morning thinking about food, I will go to sleep thinking about food. Accepting that that part of my brain might never change is really important. I do think that anorexia was a part of me. Look at that disease now as a disease. I didn't always see it that way. Even until maybe 10 years ago, I didn't understand it. So knowing who I was at that time, the time where I really remember anorexia taking hold, I was confused. I was scared, I felt chaotic, I felt like I had no control over my life. And so controlling food was the first place I went to. We had moved after my parents divorced, and then moved again, so we had 3 different homes. When I switched schools between 3rd and 4th grade, I remember sitting in the cafeteria that first couple of days and realizing quickly that's when you know you don't have friends, that cafeteria moment. And it was sad, you know, what kid doesn't want to have friends? I had come from a school and a happy life that I thought was very happy to having to switch not on my own choice. I still didn't have friends a couple weeks in, and it was starting to weigh on me, and I just said, I'm going to control something. I'm going to make this chaotic, messy girl into someone who is perfect, and someone who can get it right, and who, in my mind, that was perfect, was being skinnier and doing all the things that I thought I would look like. You know, and so for me, at that time, I had an idea of who I wanted to be. It had more to do with perfection and controlling than it did even with the body. And then it just morphed into an extreme obsession with controlling food and controlling what my body looked like. I was such a goody two-shoes that first meal that I remember skipping was at my new school at that lunchtime when I'm sitting alone, and I just made the decision to shove the pizza on pizza day into my empty chocolate milk carton. I think they were there to check us, but there were lunch ladies that stood by the trash. And I remember tossing the tray and thinking, I got away with it. Yep, and this is mine. And not only can I control this, but it's going to control what I look like. It's going to control my whole future. I have control. And that's really what it felt like. So the rebellion felt cool because it was my rebellion, and nobody even knew about it. So then it went from lunch at school to coming home and starting to have little white lies. Like, yeah, there were cupcakes at the end of the day, and I ate one and now I'm not hungry for dinner. And when one of those lies worked, it was like, woo! I had won again. And every single time was a bit of a game, and I had succeeded when I was starving. I would stand in front of the mirror, I would constantly, on my tiny frame, be pinching fat that was not there, and knowing that I was doing it because people started saying how thin I looked, but knowing that it was never enough, right? And so that's the part of anorexia that starts to spiral. You cannot stop yourself from going to the extremes on all of these, and it keeps getting worse. And I just kept consuming less and thinking that was better and better. That's when it really started to take on a whole life of its own. And so it really was 3 or 4 years before it got to the bottom of where I was so unhealthy that my mom was ready to hospitalize me. And that's when it really hit. I had been gone for a month with my grandmother in the Netherlands, and which to me was like freedom, you know, because my grandma never noticed. And so when I got off the plane, my mom just started crying as soon as I got off the airplane, and she knew that there was something very wrong. And I think now, if one of my sons did that, I don't know what you do. Because my mom's in the medical field, she knows that it's a disease, and I didn't know it was a disease. But it took another, I don't know, 6, 7 years before I really started to come out of it. I just think about my kids. The most ridiculous, it's the most ridiculous disease, really. And that's what you feel like when you realize it, because killing yourself the whole time. You must be watching your child and they do die, and it's so sad. I kept thinking it was my choice, but it was the disease making the choice. It is a disease, and that's the hardest thing for people to understand, and even for someone who had it to fully understand. And the guilt of what I carry since then, of what I did to my parents, to my siblings, to everybody. But you can't look at it like that. I had no idea what a good fat was. I had no idea what nutrition was. I didn't know that food could be good for you. I didn't know that food had worked, different proteins work with different fats. I had no idea about that stuff. So I wish that was something that if I were to go back and hand her not just a nutrition label, but also like a little bit of science of how food works in your body, I think everybody could benefit from that for many reasons, but especially anorexics. And that's when I started to learn. My stepfather is a counselor, and he started just dropping in little things like, well, I know you're going skiing today. I just want you to know that's 450 calories that you'll likely burn. And I was like, really? And he's like, I'm gonna point out that if you have 260 calories with this peanut butter on the sandwich, those things, they cancel each other out. And I was like, really? Okay. So then I still eat less, right? I still burn more. And he's like, absolutely. And so he started introducing nutrition for me, and it was just an outside voice coming in that hadn't been pestering me and hadn't been trying to tell me that I needed to eat. And he wasn't telling me I needed to eat. He was just giving me options. And it was a very open, and for me that was extremely helpful. I think my anorexia started at 10 years old and then peaked around 15 and then waned ever since. I would never say that it's fully gone, but I'm certainly recovered. I'm certainly in a place that I have a relatively healthy relationship with food. My body acceptance is better today after having 2 children. I would not think anybody who was an anorexic would ever be able to say that. But knowing what your body produced, seeing it right in front of you, being proud and grateful that you have that opportunity is so motivating to say, okay, so your belly isn't perfect. It is never going to be, in your mind, perfect. It's perfect to a million other people, most importantly, your husband, your children, and it should be to you. I don't want to make food a big deal. I just want food to be nutritionally sound. I want them to know you can't just eat a whole handful of Jelly Bellies and feel like that's going to sustain you for the rest of the day. Not because of what it makes your body do physically, but because of what it makes your body fueled by. And that's what I'm trying to focus on. We've done really well with Adrian because he loves Thor, and Thor's very strong. So utilizing food as a positive, like, well, Thor really loves having his protein, calcium, and vegetables. That is a positive way of looking versus when you eat this, it's bad. And so having that association with food that is positive is something that I've focused on. There's so much life outside of anorexia. It's so worth it to go to therapy, start talking about it, keep talking to others about it. We are so not alone. Everybody around you is thinking about food, promise. They might not be doing it to the extreme that you are, but there's such a life. I just want people to live. And once you let go of that clamp that holds you in that place, there's so much freedom and there's so much, joy to be had, not just in sitting down at a meal, but also in just living without that constant thing in your brain.